Hey guys, this is Music Tech Help Guy, and today I want to give you a tutorial in Logic Pro 10 on how to use the EXS24 software instrument, which is a sampler, to trigger entire clips. And I use this to create really cool, creative, glitchy, hard drops, where I can take a whole bunch of different clips of synthesizers that I've created, convert them to audio, and then drop them into the EXS24, and then I can trigger each one of those clips with just a press on my MIDI controller or by typing in that note in MIDI. So let me show you an example of something I created pretty quickly just using this method. And you can see there's only two instruments here. We have a software instrument up here, and then we have a drum loop down here. The drum loop just sounds like this. It's basically just kick, snare, and hi-hat. I created that separately just by dragging and dropping in samples, and then I rendered it all down to one track. And then the actual sampled instruments in EXS24 are up here, and they sound like this. And each one of those sounds you're hearing is actually an audio clip that I created using other synthesizers, mainly the ES2, and then I rendered each one of those clips as a different audio file, and I imported them into the EXS24. It sounds like it's really complicated, but it's really not. There's a very simple way to do it, and I'll show you how to do that. But real quick, let me just show you. Down here in the piano roll editor, each one of these MIDI notes represents the EXS24 playing back a different audio clip, a different sample file that was imported into the EXS24. So right here on E1, we get this sort of dirty bass sound, sort of like an arpeggiating bass sound here, some other arpeggios, some strings up here, and some other sort of synth strings down here. So each one of these MIDI notes represents a clip that was imported into the EXS24. I'll play this for you just one more time so you can watch this along with the MIDI. Okay, so let me show you how I actually went about doing this. So I'm just going to mute these two tracks for now. I have some things hidden in my session, so I'm going to hit H to unhide those. And this is what they are. So let me unmute all these tracks. What I did off screen before I made this video was I created a whole bunch of different sounds using different instruments, different effects, and this is what I came up with. I came up with 4 different sort of synth string chords up here. And each of the 4 of them is each one's on a different chord. I created this sort of real growly bass sound here. And then I created some arpeggios over here. Some arpeggiated bass sounds, rather. And then I created some additional arpeggiated sounds over here. Again, 4 different chords. They're all based on the same 4 chords from the beginning. I also have this sort of like just beeping effects sound. I've got some orchestral strings that are just a part of the EXS24 stock library. Again, each chord is based on the first 4 chords from the beginning. And then one last sort of fast arpeggio here. So each one of these clips just represents a different sound. So what I did first, after I created all the sounds that I wanted, first of all, I want to make sure that they're in the tempo that I want them to be. For me, it was 128, and that they all sort of match key-wise. You know, these are all more or less in the key of C minor, so they'll fit the composition no matter how I use them. So what I did was I bounced out all of these. So I just hit Command B, chose PCM wave file, chose whatever the native resolution and sample rate of the project is, an offline bounce. I did put a limiter on the end here just to catch any clips. Hit OK. As you can see here, I have a previous bounce. It says bounce all clips 2. That's the one we're going to use. So I'm not going to rebounce it. And then what I did was I hid and muted all of these clips. So let me mute all of these and then hide all of those. And what we'll do is we'll drag in our bounce file. So let me just go ahead and find my bounce file in my logic folder here. And here's the bounce all clips 2. Let's drag that in. And what you can see is all of these clips that I created are now contained within one audio file. So what we can do with these is I'm going to turn on my snap mode. I'm going to turn this on bar. And I'm going to grab my scissors tool. I'm going to cut each one of these different sounds on the front end into a different audio clip or region. Now with these are those arpeggiated bass notes. So they change every 4 measures. So I'll make sure I cut them up in groups of 4. And then where there's space like this, I'm going to get rid of the space. So same here. Same here. Oops. There we go. Same here. I think these are the high arpeggios. Yep. This is probably that glitchy sound. Yeah, the beeping sound, rather. Let's cut the space out here. I think these are the orchestral strings. Yep. So we'll just cut the front end of each one of those. And at the very end, there was that really fast arpeggiated clip. So what we can do now is we can drag over all these clips, right-click, go down to Convert, and from Convert, go to Convert to New Sampler Track, or press Control-E. Now, what this does is it's going to create an EXS24 instrument out of each one of these regions. Just make sure that it says Create Zones from Regions, not transient markers, and then call it whatever you want. So I'll just call it Hard Drop Samples. Now, the other thing is you can choose a trigger range. Now, it's remembered that I've chosen my first note of the trigger range as C1. By default, I think it goes way down into the zeros or into the negatives, like C -2. You don't want that because that's like 3 octaves off of your MIDI controller. Most mid-size, like 49 or 61 key MIDI controllers started at C1. So I want to start at C1 because that's where my my instrument up here starts at. So that basically that means that this first clip here is going to start at C1, then C sharp, then D sharp, E, and so forth and so on until we get to the very last clip. So we'll hit OK. And what this does is it creates an EXS24 instrument for us. You can see it right here. And it's cut up. Let me click the edit button here. It's cut up each of those clips, each of those regions, and placed them into the EXS24 instrument. So now you can see right here from C1 all the way up to F or F sharp 2, we have all of our sample files. So if I click on these, so we can now trigger them either with our MIDI controller or with just by typing in MIDI notes as well. So that's how you get to that point. I'm keeping this on polyphonic because I want to be able to use more than one clip at a time. So that's how you get to that point. So I'm going to delete these just for now because this track up here, this is Hard Drop, is identical to the instrument that I literally just showed you how to create. So again, basically each note in piano roll now is going to represent a different sample. Now, some of these samples were louder than others. So when I was, sort of composing this idea, you'll see that some sounds have lower velocities, others have higher velocities. That's just something you have to play around with. One question you may have is why even bother doing it this way? Why not just go back to the MIDI notes that we originally had, just drag and drop those around. I find it, and this is just my personal opinion, I find it way more intuitive to be able to work completely within one piano roll editor with one sound per MIDI note in the piano roll editor, and I can sort of use this whole group of sounds that we just imported into the EXS24 as a single instrument, like a single unit. So it helps me to be a little more creative with them, and I can create that sort of glitchy, heavy, hard-hitting drop sound that's really common in electronic music nowadays. And so that brings us to this point where the same thing I played for you in the beginning. But what if you want even more mix control over these sounds after you've built the sequence? Well, what we can do is we can put the EXS24 in what's called multi-output mode. So you go to select the EXS24, and instead of getting rid of it, you just choose multi-output instead of stereo. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to go into the mixer. I just pull up my mixer and create additional aux channels off of the hard drop EXS24 instrument that we created. So what I want is I want one for my synth chords. I want one for that really gritty bass note. I want one bus for the arpeggiated basses, one for the high arpeggio synth, one for that beepy synth, one for those strings, and then one for the final just quick arpeggio. So 7 different buses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the plus button here 6 times, because the initial track will count as one of those buses. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's wait for Logic. There you go. Okay. So the first one was the synth strings. Then we had the that sort of, what was it, the gritty bass, I'll just call it distorted bass. We had the bass arpeggios, and then we had the high arpeggios, and then we had our beepy sound, say beepy effects, and we had our orchestral strings, and then we had that last quick arpeggio, so I'll just call it synth arpeggio. There we go. Now notice that each one of these aux tracks we've created has a different EXS input. It's an EXS bus. Now these buses are completely separate from Logic's mix buses. This is not the same as, you know, going to Ascend and choosing bus and choosing one of these buses. No, these are buses that are basically branching off of the EXS24 instrument. Notice that even though we have 7 tracks in here, for the EXS24, there's still only one track with all the MIDI data out here. So all the MIDI data is going to be sent over to these aux tracks here. Let me pull their volumes down just a little bit, because I know it's going to get a little bit loud. Just make them match the original track there. And then we need to go into the EXS24 and actually route each of these sets of sounds to each of these auxes. So I'm going to click on Edit here. The first 4 are all those synth strings. So the way you do this is you select those notes. It'll select them up here in the edit view. And you can go over to output over here, and you can choose where you want them to go. So instead of going to group output, we're going to go to main output. Now the main is essentially 1 and 2, and that's just the main channel. Now the next one here on E is that growly, gritty bass sound. We want that to go to EXS3 and 4. So we're going to choose 3 and 4 for that one. So now when we press that, notice that it only comes through that channel. So the next one is the bass arpeggios in 5 and 6. The next 4. So these 4 are going to go to 5 and 6. And now when we press those, they only come out of the bass arp channel. Next up is the high arpeggios. The next 4. These are going to go to 7 and 8. So you can see they're only coming out of the high ARP track. 9 and 10 is that beepy sound. That's just by itself here. That's 9 and 10. And then the next 4, I believe, are the orchestral strings. Yeah. So the next 4 are going to be 11 and 12. Okay, so notice we only have 11 here. From 11 to 16, these are all mono. In earlier versions of Logic, you only had 16 channels. In one of the updates, they added 5 additional stereo channels. So what we want to do is we want to use 17 and 18 for the strings. And then the very last arpeggio is going to be 19 and 20. And that's not a big deal. I'm going to hit Command S to save our EXS24 instrument. And what I'm going to do is out here, instead of using 11 and 12, I'm going to use 17 and 18, and then 19 and 20. There we go. So you can change the actual inputs, the bus inputs on those. So now watch what happens when I play back the track. So each one of these sounds now is playing through its own channel. So if you wanted to change the panning, maybe I want my orchestral strings to be on the left, I want my synth strings to be on the right, the distorted bass I want to be center, the bass arpeggios, maybe I want those to be left, the high ARP to be right, the beepy effects, maybe hard left. And then you can add separate effects to these too. You can add different reverbs, EQ, compression, whatever you want, but it lets you individually mix all those sounds that are within the EXS24, but instead of having to have 7 different channels in your arrange window, you just have to have the one, and you can build your entire musical idea within one MIDI clip without having to have multiple channels, but you can still mix it like there's multiple channels. Yeah, let me go even harder on some of these panning effects. And then what I'll do is I'll play the whole thing one more time. We can see what it all sounds like. All right, so one more time, let's give this a listen. All right, guys, so that's pretty much it. That is how you can create separate sounds externally from the EXS24, import those sounds pretty easily into the EXS24, and then use your EXS24 instrument as a single unit of instruments, and then mix them separately with multi-output mode. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.